Hello and welcome to the second live episode of Geostrategy with Abhijit Chavda. Just a note that this is not a Q&A show. I will not be taking questions in the show. If you have questions, I will take them immediately after the show ends and when the Ask Abhijit show begins, which will begin immediately after this show ends. So there's a lot to discuss today. I'm going to discuss three big topics or issues, and let's get going. So today is the 4th of June 2025. And if you and what happened on the 4th of June 2025, right? Let's take a look at the date. The date is 4th of June 2025. The question is what happened this day? Let's There we have it. And if you go to China and you ask a member of the Chinese Communist Party, what happened on the 4th of June? They'll say, why, what happened? Nothing happened. That's going to be what they have to say. But what really happened is this: the Tiananmen Square massacre is what happened on the 4th of June in the year 1989. So let's discuss this briefly. This is something that took place uh, in Beijing. It happened in Beijing, and so this crisis it began when when a former general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Hu Yaobang, passed away. So this gentleman was known for his reformist views. He wanted reforms in the way the Chinese Communist Party operated and so on. So after the death of Hu Yaobang, students and citizens gathered in Beijing's iconic Tiananmen Square, and they were demanding political reforms and freedom of speech and so on from the Chinese Communist Party. They wanted an end to the autocratic rule of the Chinese Communist Party. And they wanted reforms. So this went on for a few days, and there was this a Statue of Liberty kind of thing that was Statue of Freedom or Liberty that was unveiled in Tiananmen Square, and more students gathered. I think the numbers exceeded in hundreds of thousands, and this went on for quite some time, many days. And then on the night of June 3 and on June 4, 1989, the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, deployed troops and tanks in Beijing and in Tiananmen Square to forcibly clear the protesters, and they fired live ammunition into the crowds, and a tremendous number of people died. And one of the iconic pictures of the Tiananmen Square massacre is the tank man, this one man standing in front of a column of tanks. So we don't know exactly how many people died. The death toll estimates range from hundreds. The Chinese Communist Party says only a few hundred died, and they were terrorists or something. But most likely, maybe thousands or tens of thousands may have died. And if you look at Google search today, you will see that even Google search seems to have scrubbed many of the images that used to be visible on Google search like 10, 15 years ago. Even Google seems to be cooperating with the Chinese Communist Party for some reason, even though Google is banned in China. It's very interesting. There seems to be some kind of cooperation between the US and China on various matters, mutually beneficial cooperation, despite the relationship the two nations have. So we don't quite know what the exact death toll is. It may never be known. And then subsequently, the Chinese Communist Party, it arrested scores of people, and it purged people from society. Purging means something really nasty in China, and so on. And this event remains extremely heavily censored in China today. There's no public remembrance of what happened, and information is restricted. And looks like even the broader world outside the Chinese Great Firewall is engaged in some kind of censorship of this, right? So if you go to China and you ask what happened on June 4, they'll say, what happened? Nothing happened. That's the censorship that you have in China today. But today we're not going to discuss the Tiananmen Square massacre. This is just in memory of those who protested and those who sought to have a better life and whose dreams and aspirations were so brutally crushed by the Chinese Communist Party, in remembrance of those people, those dreamers and seekers of freedom. And one hopes that the people of China, get more freedom someday in the future. Now let's discuss topic number 1 for today. which is the Brahmaputra water issue. So, is this a dispute? Is this a water dispute? While Tibet is disputed territory, China annexed Tibet in the year sometime in the 1950s, right? And Tibet was historically part of the Indosphere. Tibet historically, you could say, was a protectorate. Could consider it to have been a protectorate of India. It was also for some time a protectorate of the great Mongol Empire and so on. So the Brahmaputra River originates in Tibet. In Tibet, it's called the Yarlung Tsangpo. And these days, there is this controversy that's going on in media that the Chinese have threatened that they will cut off, uh, the waters. They will restrict the flow of the waters of this river into India. And the Brahmaputra is a major river in India's east, in India's far east, and it also eventually is a river that goes into Bangladesh. So it also matters a lot for Bangladesh, right? Uh, so there's this controversy that's going on right now. And what's the origin, first of all, of this controversy? So there have been statements by Chinese policy advisors and Pakistani officials in response to India's suspension of the of some parts of the Indus Waters Treaty. I mean, the Indus Waters Treaty has been held in abeyance, and and in response to India's actions, which have come in response to Pakistani long continuing Pakistani terrorism. So, in response to this, some statements have been made by Chinese and Pakistani officials. So, this statement, or this set of statements, it came from unofficial sources. It did not come from official Chinese government statements or pronouncements. So that's one thing we have to note, and we're going to look into it. But I'm also going to show you that the Chinese have pretty limited leverage when it comes to the waters of the Brahmaputra, because of various geographical and hydrological realities. China's ability to weaponize the Brahmaputra River against India is severely restricted and limited. So first, let's look at the origin of the controversy. So the origins of the controversy, the current controversy, it starts with this gentleman who Indian media seems to be pretty fond of. I see him once in a while on Indian media, on those 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Debates, shouting matches that happen on various Indian TV channels, right? So this gentleman's name is Victor Zhikai Gao. He's some kind of academic in China. He seems to be pretty influential. He speaks English reasonably well, and he's pretty vocal about the Chinese interest. So this person, Victor Zhikai Gao, he made a cryptic statement that don't do unto others what you don't want done to you. And sometime in the past few days, he made this statement. And then a Pakistani government official, Rana Ihsan Afzal, said that if India stops the flow of the Indus waters, then China can do the same to India. And after these two statements, the Indian media widely reported these statements as threats regarding the Brahmaputra River. And once something appears in the Indian media, it takes a life of its own, right? So now it's like common knowledge apparently in media that the Chinese have threatened India with these severe repercussions. That they will stop the flow of the Brahmaputra, these waters, if India persists with the abrogation of the Indus Waters Treaty. So we have to first understand that this is a completely unofficial set of things that's happened. Neither of these statements, either by the by the Chinese gentleman Victor Zhikai Gao or the Pakistani statement, neither of these statements represent official Chinese government policy or Chinese or threats issued by the Chinese government. First of all, let's understand this. But secondly, there have been Indian observers also, observers that I personally know, who have made this statement, even before probably Operation Sindoor started, which started on the 7th of May, right? So even before this started, once India announced that we are abrogating the Indus Water Treaty, several Indian analysts made the statement that once we do this, even the Chinese can weaponize water against us. So because of that, I think it's important to examine the issue properly, in detail. What are the actual facts? To what extent Can the Chinese not weaponize the waters of the Brahmaputra against India? So let's take a look at what the actual facts are. So if you do a geographical and hydrological analysis, okay, we're gonna do that in detail. So you'll find that China contributes, well, according to various sources, there are different numbers that are given. So it's hard to ascertain what the actual figures are. So various sources will say that China contributes between 10% and some will say up to 30% of the flow of the waters of the Brahmaputra. But most likely the figure is about 14%. So about 14% of the water comes into the river before the river enters the present day boundaries of India, which means that 14% of the water comes from Tibet, Chinese occupied Tibet. And the remaining 86% of the water comes mainly from rains and monsoons within India and also from Bhutan. We're going to look at Bhutan also in this context. So, if we compare the Indus, the Sindhu River and its tributaries, the whole system, with the Brahmaputra system, you will see a stark difference. What is the difference? So, when it comes to the Sindhu system, the Indus system, India controls the headwaters of the five key rivers of this system. The rivers flow largely through Pakistan after flowing through India. In the case of the Indus system, and in the 1960 treaty, India ceded 80% of the waters unilaterally to Pakistan, voluntarily, and also made a $174 million payment to Pakistan as a gesture of goodwill. I mean, imagine how incredibly naive India's political leadership was at the time. But we made these unilateral gestures. We even gave a tremendous amount of money for that time as a gesture of appeasement, as a gesture of goodwill. Anyway, that's a different story. So, if we look at the Indus system, you will find that India has genuine strategic leverage because India controls the headwaters of all five key rivers. Now, let's take a look at the Brahmaputra system. So, this image that you see on the screen, uh, it's an image of the Zanskar and Indus Sangam confluence in Ladakh. Now, if you look at the Brahmaputra system, you will find that the Brahmaputra river gains strength as it travels across India. Before it enters present day boundaries of India from Tibet, while it is in Tibet, it's still a pretty small river. It gains strength only as it travels through India. And the fact is that there is no formal treaty of any kind regarding this river that exists between India and China. And you will find that China lacks geographical advantage. And you will find that the river's strength increases downstream. So let us examine the matter in more detail. Now let's take a look at China's dam construction projects. You'll find that there's a lot of talk about China, constructing dams unilaterally on the Brahmaputra River in Chinese occupied Tibet, and this could be, terrible for India. So let's take a look at the actual facts, shall we? So, the world's largest hydroelectric dam, the Medog or Motuo, was approved in December 2024. That's just about 6-7 months ago on the Yarlong Tsangpo River, which is the name they have for Brahmaputra in Tibet. So it was just recently approved, the world's largest hydroelectric dam. And this dam will produce more energy, three times more energy than the Three Gorges Dam, which is the largest dam in the world right now, which is also a dam in China, right? And the problem is that the Tibetan plateau is seismically pretty active, which makes any kind of dam project risky, especially a large project, especially the world's largest project. Why is the Tibetan plateau so seismically active? Because it is part of the Himalayan region, and the Himalayas are a range of mountains that have been pushed upwards by the collision of the Indian tectonic plate with the Eurasian tectonic plate. And this collision is ongoing as we speak. So the Himalayas are rising in height every year, a centimeter or two. And because of this constant movement and this constant upward push of the Himalayas, the entire region, especially the Tibetan plateau, is seismically active because it is unstable. So building dams there, it's not a very good idea. And building the world's largest hydroelectric dam is it's bordering on folly, but that's what China does. So okay, so the Chinese have approved the construction of this dam. What else do the Chinese have? So let's take a look at the dam infrastructure timeline of the Chinese on this river, the Brahmaputra. So in 2015, they made the Zhangmu Dam operational. I don't know how to read this Mandarin script, but I assume it means Zhangmu Dam. So this was the first dam that was constructed on the main stem of the Brahmaputra River. This has a capacity of 510 megawatts. The construction began in 2009, and it became operational, fully operational, in the year 2015, in October 2015. Then three additional dams were approved as part of China's 12th five-year plan in the year 2013. Dagu, Jieshu, and Jiacha. Dagu has 640 megawatts capacity. Jieshu has 560, and Jiacha has 320 megawatt capacity. Right. So these dams were approved as part of China's 12th five-year plan. And then 2024, the Chinese approved the 60,000 megawatt capacity Medog or Motuo mega hydroelectricity dam project. Right. So they're damming the Brahmaputra. So this Medog station has a capacity of 60 gigawatts, three times the capacity roughly of the Three Gorges Dam. The investment is about $137 billion. That's the kind of investments the Chinese do. They are serious about everything, right? This dam is planned to become operational in about 8 years from now, right? In the year 2033. And the annual generation of power, of energy, is going to be about 300 terawatt hours, about 70 times larger than America's Hoover Dam, which is a pretty old dam, but a very, very significant and large dam. So that's the deal with this hydroelectric dam. Now, what are the construction challenges and risks? So, like I said, seismic activity. This is one of the world's most seismically active regions, tectonically active regions. And you're going to have to build complex tunnels, a whole system of tunnels through very mountainous, very rugged, very unstable terrain, very high altitude conditions. Tibet is the roof of the world, the highest large plateau on the planet. So extremely high altitude conditions. It's not easy to breathe there. It's not if you have been on the other side of the Himalayas in Ladakh or those regions, you know how hard it is to breathe over there, right? So it's very hard to breathe in this region, and there's going to be environmental impact as well. Now, what are the strategic and geopolitical implications of this? So first of all, this dam is located near what the Chinese call the disputed Arunachal Pradesh region. The Chinese call it a disputed region. So its location is over there, and this will further complicate border issues, right? And if this dam becomes operational, or when it becomes operational, it will be something that could be used as a weapon for the manipulation of the flow of the waters of the Brahmaputra. And this could be weaponized during any time of conflict or during a time of friction and tensions between the two countries. And the Chinese have done this as part of their broader Belt and Road infrastructure initiative, this dam. And India's response has been to develop the Siang Upper project in Arunachal Pradesh, which aims to generate rather much more modest 11,000 megawatts of electricity. So that's the deal. That's the geopolitical and strategic implications of these dam projects. Now, what are the environmental and security concerns? First of all, there are threats to biodiversity. The Brahmaputra Basin is one of the world's 34 biological hotspots. It's home to various endangered species, like critically endangered species, like the Gangetic river dolphin. Um, the construction of this dam could trap significant amounts of sediments upstream, and this sediment is very important for the quality of soil downstream, because sediments from up high, from upstream, they will make the soil more fertile downstream. So if the dam, its construction, and eventually the existence of the dam traps large quantities of sediments upstream and prevents them from coming downstream, this will degrade soil quality in India and also in Bangladesh, which will have the effect of reducing agricultural productivity downstream. So that's a concern. That is a valid concern, and we have to keep this in mind. And you know, flood risks. So close to 1 million people in the Brahmaputra basin, mainly India, would be affected by potential flooding if China controls downstream flow. So these are the concerns that people have expressed. It's not concerns I am expressing, but these are the concerns that have been spoken about and written about thus far in the past many years. So I think the first time this concern became public in India was about the year 2000, when the Chinese were talking about building multiple dams on the Brahmaputra, and this was considered to be an act of war in India. And ever since, people have been, experts have been writing about these threats and these risks. So it's important that when we discuss this, we put this on the record. So these are the various concerns, environmental concerns and security concerns for nations downstream, which is Bharat and Bangladesh. Now, there are also strategic and security implications. So, once this dam becomes operational, I mean, the existing dams are already there, but once this dam becomes operational, water issues could very easily strain India-China relations, right? And the fact is that the Chinese stopped sharing hydrological data of the Brahmaputra River, and they stopped sharing it in 2022, and they have never shared water data ever since. So we have absolutely no idea what kind of water flow is coming from upstream. So they have already weaponized the the waters of the Brahmaputra River. They have already weaponized this. And I remember a long time ago, around the year 2001 or 2000 or something, they had created an artificial dam in Chinese occupied Tibet. There was this river called the Parichu, and in winter they had amassed a lot of ice and snow and created this artificial dam, which once the warm weather came in would have broken, and a tremendous amount of water would have been unleashed on India. And fortunately, for some reason, it did not happen, but they have been playing these games for a very long time. So the Chinese have already weaponized the waters of the Brahmaputra River. Um, and the Tibet territory is disputed. The Chinese claim that the Arunachal Pradesh territory is disputed. So everything is disputed in this region. The entire border is undemarcated. So this dam in this region is going to complicate the dynamics of the border region. The Chinese will want to deploy way more troops in the region to protect and safeguard their asset, this dam, and so on. And there is this danger, this risk, this concern that people have expressed, that there's going to be a risk to the Indian far eastern states, northeastern states, if the Chinese control the flow of the waters and withhold them or release them as per their whims and fancies. So these are the security and strategic implications. Now, what are the expert assessments? So, first of all, Tibet is a very high altitude plateau. Like I said, it's a high altitude desert. Even Ladakh is a high altitude desert, essentially. So in Tibet, the high altitude desert conditions, they restrict the availability of the amount of water that China has, and it can weaponize. So there's a restricted amount of water that China can potentially weaponize. And then, there are seasonal variations in the kind of in the amount of water that is contributed from Chinese occupied Tibet. And so there are these minor seasonal variations. The seasons aren't very drastic up there in Tibet, but when it comes to India, we have consistent monsoon inputs uh, further south from the Himalayan region, as soon as the forests of Arunachal Pradesh start. And in India, the monsoon is pretty consistent. In Arunachal, the monsoon is very consistent, and a very heavy rainfall you get over there. So this provides natural security to India, and it makes the contribution of water from Tibet rather irrelevant. And then there's the Bhutan factor. So Bhutan is this tiny nation, but it contributes about 21% of the water that flows into the Brahmaputra. And this is an additional buffer against Chinese control. And now it kind of makes sense, perhaps, to why the Chinese are so interested in Bhutan, right? So it's because Bhutan is strategically very important, and the location, the geostrategic location, is very important. It contributes 21% of the waters of the Brahmaputra. Imagine if China controls that, how much more leverage they have. So now they'll have the 14% of the waters that come from Tibet plus 21% from Bhutan, which makes it 35%, which is a much more substantial number, right? So Bhutan's contribution is 21%. And then you have seismic challenges and engineering challenges that will limit China's ability to fully control the water flow. So it's not as simple as it sounds for China to do this. Now, what's the geopolitical, geostrategic context? What are the implications? Uh, Firstly, diplomatic considerations. Any unilateral Chinese action, you know, of whatever of weaponizing water essentially would harm relations not just with India but also with Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh is actively courting China right now, as you may be aware. Mohammed Yunus was in China recently, and he was, talking about the fact that Bangladesh can landlock India's far eastern states and so on. So, any unilateral Chinese action would harm relations not just with India but also with Bangladesh. And I suppose international scrutiny could most likely follow any kind of water weaponization attempts. Maybe, yeah. Then there's the question of regional stability, because water issues extend beyond bilateral relations between India and China. China already faces criticism. The Mekong River interventions, which affect Southeast Asia, they have built similar dams on the Mekong River, the Maganga River, the Mekong River. It's named after Maganga. So that river has been weaponized by China. This affects Southeast Asian nations. So this is a pattern you see with China. They seek to, use every kind of leverage against their neighbors. They want to bully everybody. So this is something that will be a pattern. If they actually end up attempting this. Now, let's take a look at water stress, population, water resources. So both India and China face significant water stress, right? We have to keep this in context. So comparison, China has 20% of the world's population but only 7% of water resources. Now these figures obviously are from some time ago, but these are the latest figures I could find. Now today we have the same population, or maybe India is slightly higher. So let's say we both have 20% of the world's population, okay, as of today. But China has about 7% of the water resources. Most of them come from Chinese occupied Tibet. And India has just 4% of water resources, of the world's water resources. So we are both water stressed nations. And China wants to use this as leverage by trapping more water and withholding it potentially. So understand this, that there is limited leverage the Chinese can have. The geographical realities and hydrological realities are such that they severely constrain China's ability to weaponize the waters of the Brahmaputra. Secondly, it is completely wrong to compare the India Pakistan Indus water situation with similar kind of thing with the Brahmaputra river. There are fundamental differences in both the water systems, both the river systems. In the case of the Indus waters rivers, India genuinely controls the headwaters of all the five rivers, and India genuinely can weaponize the waters. And India is not some kind of aggressor or bully. We have been at the receiving end of Pakistani terrorism for decades and decades and decades, right? And finally we are standing up for ourselves. And this is one non-violent way of making the Pakistanis behave. In the case of China India, that relationship, once again we have never been the aggressors. The Chinese are the ones who captured Tibet, annexed Tibet by force, and now they are trying to bully India. uh, so it's a very different kind of context. If someone's trying to compare the two, it's a completely false equivalence. You can't equate the two things. So then there are environmental risks because of all the reasons that I've outlined, and the water issues are intertwined with the broader India China border disputes and much more. So overall, China Chinese occupied Tibet contributes only 14% of the waters. And even if they withhold the waters of the Brahmaputra, maybe they divert the waters, they construct canals and divert the waters, it won't make much of a difference to India or to Bangladesh. And maybe it may actually end up stabilizing the Brahmaputra more than it is right now, because right now the Brahmaputra floods every year and it creates a disaster in Assam and also in Bangladesh. So maybe if China withholds the waters, 14% of the waters, it may actually be a beneficial move for India as well as Bangladesh. So overall, it's not something that China can genuinely weaponize. So it's a good idea to put this on the record, and it is important for us not to get overly stressed or worried about what China could do. Right? So that is about the Brahmaputra River. Now, before we end this topic, let's do some recommendations. What I would recommend is that both the nations should establish, first of all, a former water sharing agreement. And the onus of this is on China. India is amenable to this. The Chinese have been resisting all attempts to reason with them. So this, the onus of for this is on China. We need to establish a bilateral water sharing agreement between India and China with very clear, very unambiguous protocols. The Chinese need to restore data sharing with India. They need to reinstate hydrological data sharing mechanisms to improve flood preparedness. And both nations, I would say, especially China, should invest in decentralized water management and traditional water capture methods. Traditional water capture methods are much more sustainable because they've been tried and tested for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. The dams and stuff, it's much more recent, and it can cause geologically instability. So that is the matter of the Brahmaputra water dispute and China's attempts, what looks like China's attempts to potentially weaponize the water. And the whole story is kind of founded in rumor. But in case the Chinese do this we need to keep what I just presented in mind. Now, Ukraine. Let's discuss Ukraine. What's the current state of the Ukraine war? So, a lot has happened the past few days when it comes to the Ukraine war. And this situation is an increasingly more and more dangerous flashpoint. And what happens in Ukraine affects the rest of the world. It affects us in India. It affects people wherever they are. So let's take a look at what the current situation is. So first of all, let's very quickly rewind. I'll not go back to the 10th century like I did once to understand the context of the Ukraine war, but let's begin from roughly February 2022. So what's the current state? So first of all, the Ukraine war is Europe's largest military conflict since the Second World War. And it has fundamentally reshaped the way the world is, global geopolitics. And the war has now entered a pretty complicated stage, because now we are seeing sophisticated long-range operations and shifting diplomatic pressures ever since Mr. Trump came to power. And then what we have seen is two major operations by Ukraine in the past few days. First of all, what they call Operation Spiderweb, an unprecedented Ukrainian long-range drone strike, which demonstrates Ukraine's evolving strategic capabilities. I think it has completely flabbergasted Russia. It has caught Russia completely unawares. It's a huge intelligence and security lapse. Secondly, just a couple of days after that, there is the third attack on the Kerch Bridge by Ukraine. So the third attack, and this shows Ukraine's continued focus on Russia's strategic infrastructure. And international support for Ukraine, it faces significant hurdles now because of the changing political landscape, especially in the United States. So let's rewind to February 2022 and let's take a look at what's happened thus far. Major developments since February 2022. So the initial invasion, the special military operation began in February 2022. The initial phase was February to April 2022. So it began after months of Russian military troop and military assets buildup. Ukraine apparently successfully defended Kiev, and Russian troops had Russian columns of vehicles, armored vehicles, and troops had reached the outskirts of Kiev, and they withdrew for whatever reason by the 6th of April. So the West media will say that Ukraine successfully defended Kiev, even though Russia never actually attacked Kiev, but whatever, right? Then from May to November of the year 2022, there was a focus on the eastern part of Ukraine, eastern and southern Ukraine. Russia captured Mariupol. Ukrainian counteroffensives then reclaimed significant territory, including Kherson. We have discussed Kherson on this channel in the past couple of years. Ukraine's summer offensive, counteroffensive after the Rasputitsa season began with weapons given by the West. It failed to achieve any kind of breakthrough results against the Russian defenses. This is in the year 2023. Then from 23 to 25, we've had more and more sophisticated technological warfare. A completely new paradigm of battlefield operations has become more and more visible. Drone warfare, long range strikes, both sides have developed sophisticated unmanned system and sophisticated counter drone systems and drone defense systems, FPV drones, and all kinds of new technological innovations. So it's completely redefined the way wars are fought, right? So that's the major developments since 2022. Now Mr. Trump is in power. What has been the impact of Mr. Trump's administration? There's first of all been a dramatic change in America's Ukraine policy ever since Mr. Trump came to power from day one. So Mr. Trump had made the promise that the moment I become president, the moment I assume office, within 24 hours, I will end the Ukraine war. That's the promise he had made. He was super confident. He was supremely confident in his ability as the world's greatest negotiator that he would achieve this within 24 hours. Well, it's been several months now. It's not happened. So that's been a significant failure on the part of Mr. Trump. He's tried his best, right? In February, on the 28th of February, there was this massive confrontation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky in the White House, in the Oval Office, and that meeting ended abruptly. The minerals deal wasn't signed that day. It was supposed to be signed after the meeting, but that meeting devolved into almost like a brawl, right? And the US administration, the Trump administration, has been pushing Ukraine to make concessions, territorial concessions, and so on towards Russia. Means give up the territories you've already lost, accept the losses, and move on. And Trump is making minimal demands on Russia. So that's been the policy shift that we have seen from the time Mr. Trump came to power. A complete reversal of the policy from the days of the Biden, so-called Biden regime. So that's been the impact of Mr. Trump's administration. Now, Trump's Ukraine approach is so. Trump's defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, he declared that Ukraine's pre-2014 borders are an unrealistic objective. So that should not be part of any settlement. Whatever territory Ukraine has lost is gone. Forget about it. That's essentially what the Trump administration is saying. NATO. Ukraine wants to become a part of NATO. Ukraine wants to join NATO. The Trump administration stated that NATO membership for Ukraine is not a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. So the Trump administration is essentially looking to throw Ukraine under the bus after all these years of the US supporting Ukraine, essentially creating the problem. The US created the problem. I'll not go into the historical details because that's not the objective of this show. Then military aid and intelligence sharing was suspended for 1 week by the Trump administration in March 2025, despite getting congressional approval. So the Trump administration went against the will of the US Congress. Very interesting, right? And when it comes to voting in the UN, the US voted with Russia, North Korea, and Belarus against European-backed UN resolution which condemned the Russian invasion, the special military operation. So the US voted with Russia, North Korea, and Belarus. Well, what a polar reversal of policy. So that's been Trump's Ukraine approach. Now, let's talk about Operation Spiderweb. So this happened just a few days ago. What's been the strategic reach that Ukraine has demonstrated? So Ukraine targeted 5 air bases deep within Russian territory and pretty much dispersed from each other. 5 air bases. So there was this coordinated drone assault that targeted 5 air bases across 5 different time zones. And the operational span of this of Spiderweb is about 7,000 kilometers from Murmansk in the northwest of Russia to Amur in the Far East. Massive geographical and operational span of this operation. And according to President Zelensky himself, this operation was in the planning stage for 1 year, 6 months, and 9 days. So pretty long-term operation. And the US, Mr. Trump was never told about this. And he has still not said a word about what's happened. He seems to be utterly shocked and stunned with what happened. He has been kept out of the loop, and he is not accustomed to be treated this way. He expects a tremendous amount of deference from everybody, but he has been completely sidelined in this matter, right? So another big embarrassment for Mr. Trump, I would say. This is Operation Spiderweb. Now, how was this operation conducted? So there were 117 drones which were hidden in specially constructed mobile wooden houses on trucks, and this whole setup was designed to resemble routine cargo. So these were Russian trucks with mobile wooden houses. And then inside these mobile wooden houses, you had 117 drones that were concealed inside. Um, and these trucks were driven by Russian drivers, probably unwitting Russian drivers who had no idea of what was happening. Maybe I heard that possibly the original drivers were kidnapped and killed or something, and then somebody else, at least in one case. But anyway, and possibly these drones and all of this was smuggled into Russia from perhaps from Kazakhstan or from some other nation. So this happened deep within Russian territory. Now these drones don't have tremendously long ranges. These are $400 drones. They don't have long ranges. But these drones were smuggled deep into Russia from other countries. So it was a very well planned, well coordinated operation. Now these drones were piloted using Russia's own mobile network and this open source software called Ardu Pilot, right? So excellent technological innovation, you could say. And the Ukrainians claim that more than 40 Russian aircraft, strategic long range bombers, were damaged across the targeted bases. This includes Tupolev 95 MS bombers, Tupolev 22 M3 bombers, and so on. The Ukrainians claim more than 40 Russian aircraft were damaged. We don't know what the real numbers are. I would say at least 10 would be damaged or destroyed minimum. Obviously, when the Ukrainians will make a claim, they will try and exaggerate things and so on. But it's clearly a success, significant success, a historic success. So I cannot comment on how many aircraft were actually damaged or destroyed, but it's clearly a substantial number. I don't believe the number of 40. Maybe it's 30, but I don't think it's 40. But whatever the number is, it's a huge success for Ukraine. Nobody can deny this. Now, the strategic impact of Operations Spiderweb. So, if the number of 40 aircraft is correct, then it means that there's been a damage of approximately $7 billion worth to Russian military assets. And if 40 plus aircraft have been, let's say, disabled or destroyed, then this affects about 34% of Russia's cruise missile capacity to be used against Ukrainian cities and other targets. So these long range bombers, they can fly thousands of kilometers and they carry cruise missiles. So they can fly long distances and then launch cruise missiles from the cruise missiles operational range and then return to their air bases. So why does Russia have this strategy of these gigantic, huge, heavy, very long distance bombers? Why? It's because of Russia's strategic depth. Because Russia has this gigantic territory that covers, I don't know, 11, 12 time zones, right? So they can have bombers on air bases deep within Siberia, thousands of kilometers away from from Ukraine or the West. And these bombers can take off from there, from Siberia, and fly thousands of kilometers, come to the western borders of Russia, but never cross the borders. And from there, they can launch cruise missiles that can hit targets another 1,000, 2,000 kilometers away. That's the strategy. So the objective of all of this is to ensure that these bombers remain safe far in the east. But now let's see what happened. Despite the bombers being stationed in far eastern air bases, not far eastern, but Siberian located air bases, well, we still had the success of this operation. So this is going to have an effect on the morale of Russia, psychological effect, because this demonstrates to the Russian leadership, that essentially no facility remains beyond the reach of Ukraine. And what Ukraine has shown is this tremendous asymmetric warfare capability. So huge success overall for Ukraine. And yeah, so what you have seen is that these drones, they cost about $400, and they successfully targeted aircraft worth billions of dollars. So this shows the evolving economics of modern warfare. So this is what has happened now. um, and then we've had the attack on the Kerch bridge. So this is the one big bridge that connects the Crimean Peninsula to the Russian mainland. And there have been two attacks on this bridge before now. Now, on the 3rd of June, that's just yesterday essentially, Ukraine executed its third major attack on the Kerch bridge, which connects Russia to what they call occupied Crimea. So this operation employed underwater explosives, a novel underwater explosive methodology. And the Security Service of Ukraine reports that Ukraine, Ukrainian operators planted explosives on underwater supports of both road and rail sections, and these explosives detonated in a coordinated manner at 4:44 a.m. So once again, a security lapse, intelligence lapse. This was done under the noses of Russians, and it worked. So this attack utilized 1,100 kilograms of explosives, strategically placed on these underwater pillars. And this is a significant evolution now from the earlier attempts. The first attack on this bridge was in October 22, which was a fuel truck explosion on the bridge itself. In 2023, there was an experimental sea drone attack on the bridge. Now we have the targeting of underwater pillars. So the Russians are saying that the bridge is fine, but is it really fine? When you target underwater pillars with 1,000+ kilos of explosives, you're going to have some pretty serious damage. Does it mean that it's the integrity, the structural integrity of the bridge could be compromised? We will have to see. The Russians seem to be saying that this business as usual, but we're going to have to see. Maybe it may have caused some significant damage. So, what are the strategic significance implications, the significance of this bridge, the Kerch bridge? So, the Ukrainian SBU chief Vasil Malyuk said that the bridge is a completely legitimate target because it serves as a logistical artery between Russia and occupied Crimea, like the Ukrainians say, because Ukraine used to be for the longest time a part of Crimea, and now the Russians have taken it back, essentially. So they call it occupied Crimea. So this is a logistical artery for the Russian occupation of Crimea, and that's why it's a legitimate target. This is what the Ukrainians say. Now, this bridge was inaugurated by Mr. Putin in the year 2018, about 4 years after the Russian occupation and annexation of Crimea. The cost was about $3.7 billion in dollar terms. And this represents Russia's territorial ambitions and Russia's physical connection to Crimea. Now, what are the tactical consequences of this attack, the latest attack? Uh, so there's going to be temporary suspension of vehicle and maritime traffic. So Russian military logistics and civilian transportation is going to be disrupted. Maybe it's, I mean, the latest I heard is that Russian authorities were saying that it's business as usual. The bridge is not destroyed, not damaged significantly, and it will resume as usual. But I think we'll have to wait and watch. So right now it looks like it's disrupted Russian logistics, military logistics, and also civilian transportation. And Russian authorities, in response to this event, they suspended maritime operations near Sevastopol, which is one of the major major Crimean naval bases, which indicates that they are worried about the security of the broader region, the entire region. Maybe the whole of the Crimean region could now be under a Ukrainian security threat. So they're clearly worried, and they are worried that they've let things slip. So yeah, that's the strategic significance. So now, once again, let's take a look at the future scenarios of what happens. We've had two massive successes. One massive success by Ukraine, Operation Spiderweb, which seems to have genuinely stunned Russia, and then the Kerch Bridge, which is like a 1-2 knockout punch almost, right? It's not a knockout punch, but it's like a significant 1-2 combination in boxing. Considering all this, what do we see happening in the next 7 to 90 days. So this is kind of what I have spoken about before, I think in episode 1. This is episode 2 today. So 70% probability in the Ukraine conflict of an escalatory stalemate over the next roughly 90-day period, a 20% probability of a frozen conflict situation, and a 10% probability of a diplomatic breakthrough. Let's quickly run through these scenarios, cycle through the scenarios. The first scenario is a 70% probability scenario, escalatory stalemate. So Ukraine has now been authorized to use unrestricted long-range weapons, Western long-range weapons against Russian targets. So in the next 7 to 90 days, Ukraine is going to most likely use these weapons, and Russia is going to respond. Obviously, it's going to intensify missile attacks, drone attacks, and on Ukrainian targets, maybe military targets, maybe infrastructure targets, maybe even cities. And Russia will launch new offensives, maybe in the Sumy region, maybe somewhere else. I see that peace negotiations will not yield any significant breakthroughs, any breakthroughs whatsoever. They will simply serve as diplomatic cover for whatever military activity is happening. And I believe that NATO reinforcement will happen. Ukraine's allies will increase eastern flank deployments and aid to Ukraine. This is the most likely scenario in my assessment. 70% probability of this happening, all of this happening within the next 90 days. I think the talks have already failed. There was a round of talks yesterday that happened in Istanbul, and nothing came out of it. Russia made certain maximalist demands, and Ukraine rejected those, and that's kind of what happened. So we are already seeing this play out. Now, what's the second scenario? 20% probability. That is a frozen conflict, a static front line. That's kind of what we are seeing, what we've been seeing for quite some time. Whatever major offensives Russia does or Ukraine does in this scenario fail to achieve any major breakthroughs, and this creates a stalemate, right? And peace talks become a permanent fixture, but achieve nothing of any significance. Maybe some minor humanitarian agreements, prisoner exchanges, and so on and so forth, that sort of thing. And Western aid focuses on sustaining defense rather than any offensive actions for Ukraine. So frozen conflict. That I see this as only having a 20% probability now. And the last scenario is a 10% probability scenario, a diplomatic breakthrough. Uh, so a combination of military stalemate and economic pressure on Russia in this very unlikely scenario causes conditions for genuine negotiations. So this is the scenario that the West would like to see. Then there's external pressure. Maybe China pressurizes Russia. Maybe the US pulls off some kind of diplomatic trick or surprise, and this catalyzes the peace process and brings Russia to the negotiating table, and they become very amenable to some kind of settlement, right? And then there is a sustainable ceasefire with neutral peacekeeping forces and robust security arrangements and so on. So this is scenario C. I think it's very unlikely. The most likely scenario, in my opinion, in my assessment, is that there's going to be an escalatory stalemate. That's about a 70% probability in the next 3 or so months. So this is about the Ukraine conflict. Pretty severe, pretty serious developments have happened in the past, just the past few days, and this is and there was talk that Russia could potentially use tactical nuclear warheads in response to to the attack by Ukraine on its strategic bomber fleet, because that's a significant blow, and it kind of brings Russia's modified nuclear doctrine into play. Russia's military doctrine has been modified recently, and any attack on Russia's capability to deliver nuclear weapons by a non-nuclear power, which is in association with a nuclear armed force or a nuclear power like NATO, that would trigger the doctrine and a Russian nuclear response. So the Ukrainians are aware of this, and they have triggered. They've crossed the red line. So this is an increasingly dangerous flashpoint for the world. Please make no mistake about this. We're going to have to keep 2 eyes on this all the time. Now let's talk about the third thing, which is India and the US. So the US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has some advice for us. He has some advice for India, Mr. Lutnick. What's the advice? So here's what Mr. Lutnick said. He said that India has done some things that rub the US the wrong way. For instance, you Indians buy your military gear from Russia. And then you Indians, you are part of BRICS. And that's not really the way to make friends in America. And President Trump is calling this out. So that's what Mr. Howard Lutnick has to say. That's the advice he has to give to India. So let's understand and unpack what he means by all this, shall we? Let's understand what this very wise man is telling us. First of all, he's telling us what are the requirements for friendship with the US. He says that India must shed its defense ties with Russia in order to be friends with the US. Because it's so important to be friends with the US, right? Secondly, he says that your BRICS membership is a terrible thing. Being part of organizations the US dislikes is problematic for India and US relations. It's very problematic. Not good at all, very bad behavior. And thirdly, Mr. Lutnick says that India should give up control of its foreign policy in order to maintain its friendship with the US. So essentially, Mr. Howard Lutnick says that to be friends with the US, you have to be a vassal of the US. So friend means vassal for the US, right? Now, let's examine how America has historically treated India. And to examine that, let's examine America's historical relationship with our dear, beloved neighbor Pakistan. Let's take a look at the history of the US relationship with Pakistan, shall we? So let's do a historical analysis. 78 years of history of diplomatic, military, economic, and quote unquote asymmetric relations between the US and Pakistan. And this is a relationship that's characterized by strategic partnerships during global conflicts. So there are these periods, four periods essentially. 1947 to 1960, that's the early foundation of the relationship and the Cold War alliance. 1960 to 1979, there was military cooperation and regional conflicts. Then 1979 to 1989, strategic partnership during the Soviet-Afghan War. In 89 to present, Kashmir terrorism, nuclear tensions, and the US war on terror that came and went, and also the US occupation of Afghanistan. Let's start at the beginning. So the early foundation of US-Pakistan relations were right after 1940s, after the partitioning of India and the creation of this artificial temporary nation. So the US established diplomatic relations with Pakistan on the 15th of August 1947, one day after Pakistan was given independence or dominion status or whatever it was. So President Harry Truman sent a congratulatory message to Mohammed Ali Jinnah. And the US embassy was established at Karachi with Charles W. Lewis Jr. as chargé d'affaires ad interim. And after the deeply distressful demise of the dear Mr. Jinnah in 1948, Pakistan's Western educated leadership opted to align with the US rather than the USSR, which is in contrast with India's Western educated leadership, which decided to align with the USSR and not with the US, right? And Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan, he declined Mr. Stalin's invitation to Moscow and instead visited Washington in 1950 to meet President Truman. So this is the early foundation of the relationship and the Cold War alliance. And this is here. And this here is Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan. So during the Cold War, the alliance developed. Now, how does the alliance develop? Please watch this carefully. And other YouTubers, please watch this. You can make videos about this. So there was a mutual defense agreement between the US and Pakistan in 1954. Pakistan signed a formal mutual defense assistance agreement with the United States in the month of May 1954, and this began substantial US military aid for Pakistan. What was this mutual defense assistance agreement? It said that an attack on either nation is an attack on both nations. So if anyone attacks Pakistan, it's an attack on the US also. And if there's an attack on the US, Pakistan is also obligated to come to the aid of the US. This is the beginning of an official alliance. So the US alliance with Pakistan begins in May 1954. Then there was the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. There was something called the SEATO. In Pakistan, this was again a US-led organization, just like NATO. Just like NATO, there was SEATO. And Pakistan joined SEATO in 1954, despite not geographically being a part of Southeast Asia. Then Pakistan became an original member of the American sponsored Baghdad Pact, later known as CENTO. And then there was a treaty of friendship and commerce between the two nations that was signed in 1959 and entered into force in 1961. These are the foundations, my dear friends, chronological foundations of the Pakistan US alliance, the US Pakistan alliance. Right? Now, the two nations had this strategic intelligence cooperation. So in 1956, watch, watch what I have to say. Listen to what I have to say. Very important. In 1956, Pakistan gave the US access to the Peshawar Air Station. It allowed American U-2 spy planes to be based in Peshawar and to take off from Peshawar and do their long-range reconnaissance flights over the Soviet Union. So these U2 spy planes would take off from Peshawar, fly for thousands of kilometers over the USSR, do their espionage activities, etc., over the USSR, then fly back to Peshawar and land in Peshawar. And this arrangement demonstrated Pakistan's willingness to risk its own security for the alliance. Pakistan showed that we are committed to this. Have you heard of Gary Powers? Very famous case. So eventually, the Soviets shot down one of the U-2 planes, and the pilot's name was Gary Powers. He was captured by the USSR. Where did he take off from? Very famous case. Most people have forgotten today. Where did he take off from? He took off from Peshawar. Very old relationship, very deep relationship these two nations have, right? So that is the spying that was happening from Peshawar. Now, military cooperation and regional conflicts. So Pakistan played a very important, crucial role in facilitating the US-China relations when President Nixon decided to normalize relations with Beijing. Pakistani leaders served as key intermediaries. They provided a very valuable service to the United States. Then there was this war in 1965, the India-Pakistan War. Uh, so this war began in 1965, and the US placed an embargo on military equipment to both Pakistan and India on the 8th of September 1965. But they had already supplied everything the Pakistanis needed. All the weapons, all the arms, all the ammunition that supplied. So after supplying everything the Pakistanis need, the US placed an embargo on military equipment to both nations. How nice. And the Pakistanis expressed deep disappointments, and they expected American support based on alliance commitments. So when there's an alliance with the US can do whatever it wishes, but the others can't. So the Pakistanis were kind of disappointed, but the Americans had made sure the Pakistanis would be well equipped and all that already before, you know, you know, before placing this so-called embargo. Then let's move on to 6 years down the line, the Bangladesh Liberation War. So the United States sent this USS Enterprise aircraft carrier group to the Bay of Bengal. The objective was to intimidate India, to arm twist India, and ensure that India doesn't attack Pakistan. So the US was looking out for its best friend, for its number one minion, Pakistan. And despite it being proven that Pakistan was engaging in large scale genocide against Hindus in East Pakistan, and this was being condemned worldwide. Despite this, the US persisted in supporting Pakistan, supporting genocide. Imagine that. And the military outcome was the destruction of Pakistan, the bifurcation, the vivisection of Pakistan. It was an absolute humiliation for Pakistan and also for the US. And it damaged US prestige in both nations, Pakistan as well as India. India, it's natural, but Pakistan also. So that was a humiliation for the US, 1971. And a couple of years later, they acquired Diego Garcia, from where they can project power themselves. So that's an outcome of that, actually. Then there's the Soviet-Afghan war partnership. So 79 comes and goes, 71 comes and goes. It's a disaster for the US and for Pakistan. Pakistan is cut in half. Then in 1979, on Christmas Day, the USSR invades Afghanistan. So that brings the relationship to its peak, to its pinnacle, the US-Pakistan relationship. So this transformed US-Pakistan relations. It created the most intense period of cooperation in the bilateral relationships history. So There was a 5-year assistance package that began in 1981, $3.2 billion of aid, which is like $3.2 trillion kind of today. Kind of. I'm exaggerating for effect, but it's kind of like that. In 1981, $3.2 billion was an unheard of sum of money. And about 3 million, more than 3 billion Afghan refugees came into Pakistan in the first year, and so on and so forth. So this was a transformative event in this relationship, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Then in 1989, the Soviets withdraw from Afghanistan. So Pakistan has been, given all this training by the Americans on how to conduct these asymmetric warfare operations, terrorism essentially, how to sabotage, how to conduct jihad, and all these operations. So now Pakistan is suddenly left with this surplus of terrorists. So what does the Pakistani ISI do? It redirects all these surplus terrorists and weapons and so-called militants from the Afghan operations into Kashmir. And the Pakistanis, they established networks with Afghan Mujahideen, they used them to train Kashmiri terror groups, or terror groups that would operate within Kashmir. The strategic objective was to weaken India's hold on Jammu and Kashmir through asymmetric warfare, which means terrorism. So the Pakistanis leveraged US funds and US material to internationalize the Kashmir issue. And do you know what? The Americans knew exactly what was happening. And India would complain to the US. India would protest. And what would the Americans say? This is a domestic law and order issue in your state. They knew exactly what was happening because they were funding it. They were managing it. But they would tell India, this is your domestic law and order issue. You are so inept, you can't even handle that. You can't even handle a domestic law and order issue. That's what the Americans would tell India, while funding and financing Pakistani terrorism in Kashmir. Right? That's US friendship for us. And then there was this transformation of the Kashmir situation. Afghan war veterans who had been fighting the Soviets for a decade, they introduced advanced guerrilla tactics and religious extremism into Kashmir. And Pakistan-based terrorist camps were repurposed for Kashmir-focused terrorist groups. And the ISI funneled US funds and US supplied weapons, including Stinger missiles, into Kashmir. American Stinger missiles were funneled into Kashmir by Pakistan, right? American funds, American weapons, American training. What else did the Pakistanis need? Then later on, you had nuclear tensions and sanctions. So there was something called the Pressler Amendment in US law, which required presidential certification for the US president that Pakistan did not possess nuclear weapons. So every year, the US was supplying funds to the Pakistanis to conduct whatever they wanted to do against India and whatever. But for this to happen, the Pressler Amendment required every year a presidential certification that Pakistan did not possess nuclear weapons. Only then would the funds be dispersed. And the US president would sign on that. But then 1998 happened. India tested 5 nuclear weapons, and the Pakistan tested 5 nuclear or 6 nuclear weapons of its own in response to India's tests, and this resulted in US sanctions, additional US sanctions on Pakistan. So this was not a good time for the Pakistan-US relationship. They were getting money from the US. They had been given F-16s, yes sir, but this was a roller coaster pattern. So there were cycles of cooperation and estrangement. The US, even though Pakistan was their, most loyal ally, they would still test the alliance. And, you have to keep people off balance. So that's what they would do. So there was a deal. Then you had this massive event, 9/11, right? 9/11 happened. So what did you have? So aid goes to Pakistan. Once again, after 9/11 happens and the Bush administration decides to do this war on terror, then this completely once again realigned US-Pakistan relations. Once again, Pakistan becomes vitally important to the US. And President, or rather Dictator Musharraf, immediately aligned Pakistan with the US war on terrorism. And he provided all his services to the US to use Pakistan as the staging base, launching base, etc., for the invasion of Afghanistan and the supplies and so on and so forth. So there's $10 billion here. during the Bush era, and then during the Obama era, you have $7.5 billion. Tremendous amounts of funds were given by the Americans to Pakistan, right? And the Pakistan gave all the services, the ISI, etc., to the Americans. So that's the post 9/11 strategic partnership. Then there was this attack on Mumbai, terror attack, 26/11, uh, the 26th of November 2008. Pakistani terrorists targeted Mumbai, and they targeted multiple locations in India's financial capital. And I don't know, maybe 160, 170 odd people died, including Indians, mostly Indians, but also foreign citizens, Americans as well, right? And evidence has demonstrated, beyond a shred of doubt, that Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, provided logistical support, training, and facilitation to the terrorists. And the terrorists were all Pakistani nationals. And one terrorist was thankfully captured, Ajmal Kasab. He was a Pakistani. And they were all linked to various Pakistani terrorist networks. Now, who was the real mastermind? Who was the real mastermind of the 26/11 attack? It was an American citizen called David Coleman Headley. He was a DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency informant. He sometimes used the alias Dawood Gilani. He had a blue eye and a brown eye. He had a brown father and a white mother. His dad was Pakistani. So he had this thing, this natural uh, inclination to have this hatred for India. So Dawood Gilani, David Headley, he conducted multiple reconnaissance missions in Mumbai. He had a Western name, a US passport. And you know how Indians are. They love the white guy. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Full support, sir. So he conducted multiple reconnaissance missions in Mumbai before the attack. He was eventually arrested by the FBI in 2009, and he is said to have avoided the death penalty by cooperating with investigators, and this revealed ISI's involvement. And he was sentenced to 35 years in a US federal prison in the year 2013, where he remains incarcerated. The United States has consistently refused to extradite David Coleman Headley to India, despite the existence of the 1997 India US extradition treaty. What is the US trying to hide, is my question. Yes? Yes. What is the US trying to hide? And then you have this. So the US National Security Agency intercepted communications between Lashkar-e-Taiba operatives many months before the attacks. But they say they failed to connect the dots. Yeah. And Britain's GCHQ tracked the terrorist Zarar Shah's Google Earth searches for Mumbai targets. But they also did not alert the Indian counterparts, which means the US and the UK knew what was coming. Maybe they knew, maybe they more than knew. Who knows? We don't know. Yeah. US friendship. So they call this missed opportunities. So we could not connect the dots. We are so naive, we can't connect the dots. And after the attack, the US temporarily placed some pressure on Pakistan to temporarily arrest Lashkar-e-Taiba leaders like Hafiz Saeed. And very quickly, all of that was brushed under the carpet, and most of them resumed activities under new fronts like Jamaat ud whatever. So you create a new name for the organization, you incorporate it somewhere or whatever, and then you start work. Say you continue the work under this new name, right? Disposable names for the organization. Keep on churning out new names. So all the activities resumed very quickly. And Pakistan declared one of the masterminds, Sajid Mir, dead in 2021. But then they staged his arrest under FATF pressure. So that's the kind of deal you have. Now, between 2016 and 2025 until today, what's the contemporary US support for Pakistan been like? Are we aware that Pakistan is the world's epicenter for terrorism? They use terrorism as state policy, right? What's the contemporary US support for Pakistan between 2016 and 2025? Look, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is something that is essentially owned by the US. Okay? It is used to disburse rewards to those who cooperate. So, since 1958, okay, let's go back to 58. Since 1958, the IMF has bailed out Pakistan 24 times. Pakistan is one of the most frequent recipients of IMF bailouts. In May 2024, a 37-month program was approved by the IMF through the Extended Fund Facility for $7 billion. So they essentially have been given $7 billion in May 2024. And then recently, the IMF has given 1.4 billions of climate funding to the Pakistanis, resilience and sustainability facility to address climate vulnerabilities, because Pakistan is a very climatically vulnerable nation. And India has raised concerns about this. This is diplomatic language now. India has raised concern about the effectiveness of IMF programs in Pakistan, citing poor track records and potential misuse of debt financing for state sponsored terrorism. So India has been raising the concerns. The IMF doesn't care, which means the US doesn't care. Now, the World Bank. That's another organization that is owned by the US. It's also the World Bank and the IMF are both used to disburse freebies and rewards to those who serve US interests. So, the World Bank, it has decided to give Pakistan $40 billion, unprecedented 10-year investment plan in Pakistan. It's a very investment worthy nation, right? Pakistan, as part of the country partnership framework 2025 to 35. The World Bank is investing $40 billion in Pakistan over the next 10 years. $20 billion of this is funding for government projects, public projects, and $20 billion is investment for the private sector in Pakistan. This massive international support, American support, has faced criticism because of Pakistan's continued status as the global epicenter of terrorism and regional instability. Right? This is US support for India's number one enemy. Now, in May 2025, we had Operation Sindoor. India finally said enough is enough. So India launched Operation Sindoor in response to the Pakistani terror attack in Pahalgam. From May 7 to May 10, India incapacitated Pakistan's air defenses. India struck at Pakistan's nuclear warhead storage sites, and India rendered 11 Pakistani air bases minimum temporarily inoperative. On the 10th of May 2025, Pakistan's DGM, Pakistan's Director General of Military Operations, DGMO, he called up his Indian counterpart and he begged for a ceasefire. And India agreed to pause operations as a consequence. Now, US claims about Operation Sindoor. So Mr. Trump and his administration have repeatedly claimed that they played a decisive role in mediating the so-called ceasefire between India and Pakistan. President Trump claims that the US intervention prevented a potential nuclear war. And he said that I did this through trade incentives and threats. And Trump announced this so-called truce publicly before either India or Pakistan made any official statements. So he wants to be the center of attention. He wants to claim some kind of victory because he has failed miserably in Ukraine, he's failed miserably in Gaza, but he wants some kind of victory to show to his voters. And the Trump administration cited this as the evidence of effective trade diplomacy, American trade diplomacy, and presidential authority in resolving major crises. Now, what's India's response been like? India said that this ceasefire or pause in activities resulted from direct military to military talks between the DGMOs of both the countries. Indian officials emphasized and reiterated there was no involvement or pressure from the US in the decision. So we are essentially saying Mr. Trump is lying. That's what India has said. And India's Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Congress leader Shashi Tharoor both rejected the US claims. Yeah, bipartisan agreement in this matter. And India has reiterated its long-standing position that issues with Pakistan will only be resolved bilaterally. We will not accept any foreign mediation. So this is the history of US support for Pakistan. And they are lecturing India about how to be friends with the US. Is it possible to be friends with this nation, which has this track record of steadfastly supporting the global epicenter of terrorism, essentially supporting terrorism, right? So here's how the US can be friends with India. How the US can be friends with India. First of all, dear US, please stop supporting Pakistani terrorism. End your funding for Pakistan and ensure that your vassals do the same thing. Stop funding Pakistan. Denuclearize Pakistan. If there are US nuclear warheads on Pakistani territory, yeah, let's broach that issue. Take those back and eliminate Pakistan's terrorist infrastructure. Next, ensure there is justice for terrorism victims. Make sure that Pakistan hands over wanted terrorists to India. Then hand over the American terrorists. Extradite David Coleman Hadley to India. And then stop supporting Khalistani terrorists, whether they're in the US, whether they're in Canada or wherever else. Stop supporting Khalistani terrorists. And last of all, remember that India is a sovereign nation. India is one of the only five sovereign nations on the planet. And as a sovereign nation, India will be friends with whomever our interests converge with. Respect sovereignty. You want friendship with India, you got to do these things. Don't lecture India. So that's the deal. That's the deal. That's how the US can be friends with India. All right, my friends, that brings us to the end of today's live stream, episode 2 of Ask Abhijit. If you gained some value from what you have seen here, what you've heard here, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any questions for me, let's get into Ask Abhijit, and I will take your questions for about an hour. All right, thank you so much. Take care, and I will see you very soon. Bye bye.